Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. When it comes to news for EVE Online, well, CCP launched the hunt again, so you gotta go out there and hunt for some capsules that can then give you keys to run some sites. I haven't done any of that at this point just yet. Honestly, my horizon is already at FanFest. I'm really curious to see what CCP has planned, what they'll be announcing there, and so my full focus is on being ready for that and for the potential information that will come out. Should be in like less than a month, so I do think by the end of the month of April we can expect like our first bits of information that we can start to speculate on what the plans are for EVE Online at this point. And yeah, that's exactly where my focus lies. So at the moment I would basically say this is a good time to prepare to still do some maintenance stuff that you might not have done in EVE Online just yet. And for me, that is still getting stuff from all the different stations that I've got into the trade hubs, so that we can perhaps do some active trading depending on the news that comes out. Let's also take a quick look at the New Eden store here, see what's happening. We get a sale for the Proteus skin, of course got a buff, and then we get some new skin as well, the Ace of Pot Hunter skin, black and white. Honestly, that looks pretty damn good. That's a theme that I really like. And then you also have a couple of bundles for apparel and things like that. Pretty cool. I definitely like the look of that skin. Very close to the police skin here, for instance, on the Ishtar. That's actually, a bit of a surprise. I didn't know that this was happening, but that looks pretty damn cool. For the services, we don't have anything special to report here as far as I can tell. Yep, exactly. So let's get into the market and let's see what's happening there. My personal expectation is that we will be in a bit of a wait and see pattern for the market at this point as well. There is obviously an exception at this point already. Mega site went up like crazy, 25% in a week. Let's take a look at what's happening there. But first of all, we get plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 230. Like that, and let's take a look. So here we go for plex. You can see a little bit of pressure on the sellers. If we go to the average prices, to the chart, we're back on the 2.93 million range. Pretty stable actually. This is a pretty narrow margin between these two data points, and so we lost a little bit of ground at the high point where the average price went above 3 million. Is probably due to the plex for good drive that happened. That should be over at this point. Volumes are normalizing and we're back. It's still a pretty expensive plex place, but I think we'll start to move sideways here until we get closer to FanFest. Might even see a little bit of pressure there as well at this point. So a little bit above 3 million for the sellers in Gita Station, 2.9 million for the buyers. If you go to the player-owned trade hubs, basically in the same range, above 3 million, and the buyers are not even that much more aggressive, 2.9 million for the buyers. So we are down a little bit, got a little bit of breathing room. I think the extra demand from plex for good is basically this recovery here. Then we get the multiple pilot training certificates that are continuing their slow and steady climb above 1.3 billion at this point. This is still, in my opinion, the market going through all of the volumes that have been acquired on this massive sale that happened late January. This is a tiny market on a daily basis, so this is really slow to fully recover. We're back above 1.3 billion though, so the trend is there. 1.3 billion for the sellers, 125 pretty much for the buyers. So that upward trend, I don't think that is going to stop until we probably get a little bit of parity between plex and the training certificate. That is if plex starts to move sideways as well. So plex has basically done some moves which have not impacted the multiple pilot training certificate that much. And I think that we will continue here to have this slow uptrend, unless, for instance, plex all of a sudden starts to really decline for who knows whatever reason. That might start to have a little bit of an impact, but for now it's really doing its own thing. The extractors, next skill extractor, there we go. Same pattern, of course, as The plex chart, so went above 350 million. We're back below that, but still very expensive on this full 1 year chart. 340,000 million, excuse me, in the player owned trade hubs, 344 in JITA. That's really, I mean, there's a little bit of competition happening outside of JITA, where they have taken over the cutting edge sales, the lowest sale prices, but honestly the margin is so thin that this could get plugged very quickly. 330,000 plus for the buyers. Pretty narrow margin here again, 9 million between sellers and buyers is not a lot on something that costs 300 million ISK, and so here again my expectation will probably start to move sideways. Impact on the injectors that basically tried to form a bottom here at 630 and for now seems to be consolidating that. Most daily averages around 650 million for the large skill injector. Bit of a volume jump here that pushed the price back up. 652 million for the sellers, 617 for the buyers. So we still have that large margin between sellers and buyers. This, in my opinion, does show that the thinking of the market has completely shifted after breaking through 630 million on the low point for the average prices. I think here the market said that's low enough and we should start to get into a buying mindset just to be ready. I think if CCP announces something really cool at FanFest that requires more skill points, different skill points, perhaps getting a couple of characters ready, then you want those cheap large skill injectors, and I think that's what happened here with sellers pushed up to 650 million, which is probably not that much of a move compared to where sellers were at here, but basically buyers have a very hard time at the moment picking up those large skill injectors considering these average prices. I don't think small scale injectors can bug that trend well. Basically shot up way more sharply all of a sudden. So we were below, I think this is the 135, but it's probably the 130 on the chart. If I'm not mistaken, there is something wrong here. But then we shot back up to 140. And now we recovered a little bit from that, but we're still clearly more expensive than we were about a month ago. So small scale injectors selling for 133 million, buyers coming in at 122, 116, 117 for most. I think here we can tell that this is that same story where during this downtrend here of a couple of months, February, March, it was actually pretty easy to pick up some small scale injectors from the buy orders, even if they were pretty damn low. But once the bottom was formed, we're now being dominated again by the sellers, and so people want these small scale injectors and they're not really willing to dump them to the buyers anymore. A little bit of a different dynamic. It is entirely possible though that with this action, players or speculators have taken their positions, are now basically ready, and that will also start to move sideways towards FanFest. Next we've got the daily alpha injector. Continuing the slow climb here, very interesting, especially for me personally, to see if CCP will intervene here again as well, because we are getting close to that 50 million mark, which from the look of things on this chart was a metric where CCP says time to do an alpha injector sale, because we don't want 50 million to be that average goal. It's a little bit too much. We'd rather get it to 40-45 million, and that's way more doable for these alpha players. So you get this big volume that crashed the price down to less than 40 million ISK. For now, the daily alpha injectors, 49 million for the sellers, 43 million for the buyers. So that's still a reasonable margin between sellers and buyers, showing that it's not really like a super craze on these daily alpha injectors just yet. It's again that the market has switched to one where sellers can basically ask the price. No one is just straight up dumping daily alpha injectors for the 43 million ISK at this point, or next to no one, considering these average prices. If you want one, you are paying the price that sellers want rather than buyers want, and so that the injector market does seem to be in that mode at the moment, which leaves a little bit of room for, if it ever switches, for prices to come back down decently quickly. The margin is still quite nice, but the pressure of of course, for these buyers to go up in price will be mounting as well. And I would not be surprised if we head for 50 million, and that will be enough to push buyers, let's say above 45 towards maybe even 47 million. And that could be a price point where CCP comes in again. We'll see, of course, what happens. Then we've got the hypercores that are following the plex pattern very closely. I think here, again, the plex for good drive will have something to do with it. My speculation is that a little bit of getting rid of some really expensive item, or rather selling some really expensive items through the Hypernet relay is a successful way of doing that. So we got this increased need for these hypercores, and we're coming back down from that now that plex for good is over. 310,000 to 15,000 for most sellers, and still above 300,000 for the buyers, is definitely still again in the expensive range despite the pullback in price. Next up, the minerals, that's coming in at 1040. Like that. As always, we'll start with titanium that has finally stalled the descent, basically staying above 4 ISK, which is not bad news, I would say. 4, let's see here in GDAS station is definitely the better. 420 pretty much for the sellers, and still above 4 ISK for the buyers. So that is good news. I'm kind of hoping and thinking that we can stabilize here. You know, this has been a couple of weeks at this point that we haven't been able to really break through the 4 ISK after these couple of days where, you know, people said probably, yeah, maybe we should try to buy a little bit of titanium. Hopefully we can basically keep it above 4. But of course, if we do push through, we've been here before, right, where it looked like 4.5 was going to be defended, then look out below, we could go even lower. Let's see if pyrite is doing the same thing. I think that could be a good indication, and it is not. So that's not good news. You know, this is basically a data point for me that says maybe titanium can go even lower as well, because we just pushed to 7.5 ISK for pyrite. Compare that to, you know, at the start of the year or just a couple of months ago, 15-20 ISK for pyrite. Titanium 4.5 was a good price. Very, very big difference in range. If you know, make the same assumption here, 7.5 ISK for pyrite, then there's definitely room for lower prices for titanium as well. 770 for the first seller, and 697, so even buyers are already below 7 ISK for pyrite. That's quite a dramatic crash though. We are seeing quite a bit of volumes happening here as well. Really curious to see if people are going to start to buy at these prices as well. But for now, massive crash in pyrite. So high-sec minerals, pyrite not doing too well. Titanium trying to hold on to that 4 ISK, but will it succeed? You know, I was kind of optimistic looking at the chart, but looking at pyrite, I think we may actually go even lower. And then let's see if at least Mexelon is holding on. It is starting to lose some ground here as well, going away from that 75 ISK, so that's not good news. 65 for the sellers now, 61 for the buyers. Still, obviously, your focus if you're mining in high-sec, try to grab some Mexelon on every single cycle, because everything else is just cratering massively. Then we move on to the low-sec minerals. Here is Isogen. That's basically settling at 300 ISK for the moment. I think a little bit of competition is starting to come in here. 310 to 255. Definitely a big spread, a big range between buyers and sellers as well. And here we got 100 million units being bought at 255. Also, I would say a big difference compared to before. And then look at the volumes of these orders. We got a 35 million here, but then 18, 10, 14 are really the big ones. So the hundreds and hundreds of millions of units in a single sell order, we need to go to 600 ISK before we find the next one on that one. That may be a little bit optimistic, because I think these buy orders here, 140 million units in just 2 buy orders, are going to start to change the dynamic a little bit. Last couple of months have clearly been dominated by this play of sell volumes going down, down and down. At least on the extreme extremely large site. I think a little bit of production pickup happening in Nullsec has basically boosted us consistently to higher and higher prices without much resistance. I do think here we will start to see a little bit more of a more normal price action, with price going up, price going down a little bit on this final push that got us to 300 disk. But who knows, of course. It is I think 255 was like the previous one where a big massive sell order was basically keeping us in check. Once that was removed, we managed to push up to 300, and now buyers are coming in at 255. So who knows, maybe on the longer term, and we're talking 80 plus days for that sell order, the 600 disk might still be in play. That would make it like probably a 50% of Noxium. Not sure if that's accurate, but that's basically the gamble that we're seeing on that one big sell order. Let's move on to Noxium next and see what that one is doing. And here, of course, I think you can see, I'm not saying that we're already at this top here, but you can see that change in dynamic in how the market starts to move once we do reach that active supply versus active demand period. You start to move up and down depending on what's happening in the market, rather than the domination of way more stable and low prices due to the massive old volumes that were still coming to the market on any increased price basically. And so Noxium at the moment, I think a little bit of pressure, yeah, down maybe a touch, but still sellers 1320, buyers 1262, so pretty narrow margin. You gotta pay what the sellers ask for Noxium here as well. And so I would say actually not a 1400, so maybe around average at this current range. Then we get a Zydrine that's trying to defend 1100, but we are starting to see a little bit of pressure on this one. 1120 for the sellers, 1066 for the buyers. Very expensive as well, of course. And here we had this strange, you could say, move up to 1200. So we've got one right here in November, and then we got one right here in March. Despite the increased availability, I'm gonna guess that focus for larger entities is mostly still on moon mining, which has been crashing the advanced moon materials market. But for some reason, if we look at Megasite now as well, we should see another jump. So here again, you get the December jump, then you get a jump in February, and now the early April jump for Megasite, pushing sellers to 1220 ISK, buyers at 1150. And this to me does come as a little bit of a surprise. So let's see, Zydrine 1100, Megasite 1200. The one thing that I can understand here is that basically the old situation where Megasite was harder to get and thus more expensive than Zydrine has been restored here in basically 3 violent, very sharp upswings in the price. My expectation, I'll be honest, I think we're here to stay on that 1200 range for Megasite, and that big Gnostic corporations, whoever it is that's dominating the market, is able to set the price. And this is the disadvantage, you could say, for those that want to do industry in high-sec at the moment, of course, is that you've got basically a close to a monopoly on Megasite and Zydrine from some very large entities. They can set the price, and then you get this type of a chart, especially when, and I do think that's right, Megasite was undervalued when it was below 750, even below 1000, especially if you have Zydrine as a comparison. And so you get these very sharp increases, basically price setting, price manipulation by those big groups, which is a completely different dynamic from what's happening, for instance, in Noxium, a low-sec mineral, where it's much harder to completely corner the market, and where you get a little bit more of supply demand showing up in ups and downs that are pretty regular within a price band. Here we get way more stable a market range, 1000 disk here, and especially on the Megasite one, you get very clearly, right, super stable periods of several months, but then a new price is decided. Here it is, you're gonna pay 1200 disk for Megasite at this point. Finally, we've got Morphite that has also stalled the decrease in price, so landed on 37,500. Are we at 40k, around 40,000 disk a unit? Still pretty expensive historically speaking, but you can see the margin has narrowed, 42,590 for the sellers, 40,420 for the buyers. Really narrow margin here. I think 40k is what the market is settling at for Morphyte in the current conditions. To give you guys the historical perspective, I used to buy Morphyte as an investment when it was below 10,000 discs, so we're still in pretty damn expensive territory, but not in the 100,000 plus for a single piece of Morphyte anymore. So the increased availability and the meta, you could say, the meta shift in mining, I think has been absorbed for the Morphyte market. It's starting to show up in Zydrine and Megasite, I think, where it's not that easy to just, have a lot of extra of these anymore, and so the prices are going up quite significantly. But the increased availability in Isaac minerals is putting a lot of pressure on the price at the moment, as maybe there's even a little bit of spillover with the maturity, I would say, in nullsec towards some lowsec, high-sec efforts, with low-sec being the real winner, I think, of the whole thing, and that might give even more breathing room to Isogen. I'm really not sure, but I basically do think that here the dynamic is going to start to change, and I will see some ups and some downs at this point as well. We'll see, of course, how this evolves. Next up, we've got the PI market coming in at 2020. There we go. Let's see what's happening here. I think my expectation is what we're seeing right here, a bit more sideways movement, players waiting for the actual announcement of changes to industry. The tidbit that was dropped during one of the live streams, I believe, is that CCP was looking at decoupling Dreadnought production from carrier production in order to make Dread Bomb something that would be economically viable, a tactic that's probably pretty expensive at the moment in nullsec. And so I'm expecting basically a wait and see approach. So broadcast nodes have definitely started to move sideways, 1.6 million for the sellers, 1.5 for the buyers, really narrow margin here, basically a coming together, a decision from the market. This is what we're gambling on. The price will be, I would say, increased demand, probably higher production, being the thinking behind that. Construction blocks managing to make its way up to 9,000 discs. I do think in general, perhaps there is a bit of expectation that if CCP makes industry a little bit more accessible from the resource perspective, especially for some bigger ships, that this will mean more demand, more need for the rawer materials like these refined PI materials, like construction blocks, and of course a lot of activity as well that might require more fuel, and that this is why we are seeing more demand and stronger prices, for instance for the construction blocks that go up to 9,400 discs for the sellers, 9,100 for the buyers. Haven't seen that in a very long time here again as well. I think 10,000 discs again is like that historical right or average price for, or normal price you could say, for construction blocks. And you can see that just a couple of days ago we actually touched that for a moment at 9,900. So we are really normalizing a little bit in PI, which is coming as a little bit of a surprise to me personally. But 1 year high point and expensive construction blocks. So those that are not building the final product, the advanced move materials and things like that, but that are actually sticking to, which like me, which is what I'm doing, sticking to like refined PI materials, are probably having a pretty good time, because consumer electronics did go back down to 6,000 discs, but you can see that there are players willing to snag up those cheap PI materials, and so pushing back to 7,000 discs, which is, well, still the best price for the last 8 to 9 months. It's almost 7,000 for the sellers, 6,100 for the buyers. The change, I would say, is that there is more demand in these goods. Coolants losing a little bit of ground, really trying to defend 10,000 discs, but not really succeeding on the 5-day moving average. Still sellers 10,200, buyers at 9,500. And honestly, at this price range, a little bit of competition and a little bit more focus, of course, on people bringing in more coolants, producing more coolants, considering the opportunity, is probably starting to push prices down a little bit. Maybe some selling, like myself, I have been selling some coolants and mechanical parts as well, is starting to show up in the chart, but the fact that sellers are still above 10,000 is, I would say, good news. And if we lose a little bit on coolants, but we can gain in most of the other refined PI materials, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Cryoprotectant Solutions is finally starting to decline, still not in buy order territory, but the sell opportunity is clearly over. 118,000 for the sellers, 115,000 for the buyers. So let's keep this one in mind. It really is tied to implants, and maybe we can look out for a next investment opportunity. The real question is, will we be able to snag cryoprotected solutions below 100,000 again, which might not be the case considering what all the other PI materials have been doing, at least the raw ones below specialized. Then we get enriched uranium, that's back above 10k, which is also, I would say, pretty good news. 10,100 for the sellers, 10,000 for the buyers. Here is that show of a stronger demand, in my opinion. We did spike up quite substantially to 15k, but we're basically back in a more normal range. 10,000 is for refined PI. For me, is like really good news, very nice. It's worth it to produce that, bring it to the market. You're getting a nice return on PI. Integrity response drones pulling away from the bottom a little bit, so still seeing maybe some speculation, because we're up to 1.7 million and 1.6 million for the buyers, so buyers are clearly forced up on this one as well. But I'm a bit surprised that we are actually moving up in price and not a little bit more sideways. Still, it's basically not the high point, but in the more expensive range from the last couple of months. Mechanical parts are easily staying above 9,000 discs, so they're having their first good month, I would say, here as well. And it's 10,200 for the sellers again, 8.5 for the buyers. So here buyers are not willing to step up just yet, but I think they'll be forced to eventually, considering the trend that we're starting to see even in construction blocks and consumer electronics. Nanites, at least it's trying to, make some higher highs here, so the trend on the 20-day moving average is clearly up. We are at that above 5,500 disc at this point, but can we go even higher? That's the real question. 5.8 for the sellers, 5.3 for the buyers. I think this is like the closest margin we've seen in a very long time as well, and at a high range for this 1-year chart, so that's good news. But of course, if we could continue the trend, that would be a very good indication for everything else as well. Nano factories, a little bit more in line with what I expected, some clear volatility, but then we start to move sideways at a range that's again around average, maybe even slightly above average for the full 1-year chart. 1 million for the sellers, 900,000 for the buyers. Organic mortar applicators did bring in another 1-year low point. Some data points at 600,000 I think are buy signals. 650 now to 620. You see those buyers have closed the gap, but sellers aren't really able to take too much advantage of this one. Recursive computing modules, 1 million, still 1 million. Big volume increase here though, so do we have a move at the moment? Yeah, look at that, big buying happening right now. You could say 1.5 million all of a sudden for the sellers, should push the price back up. Buyers haven't responded yet, but yeah, it's basically happening right now, so I would not be surprised that we'll get into that higher range and stay there in the upcoming hours and days. Next week could be interesting here. Robotics losing a little bit of ground, that's interesting. So a historical perspective, from my opinion, 100,000 disc for robotics, we're still way off from that. 70k for the sellers, 66 for the buyers. Self-harmonizing power cores going up again, taking that position, still not at the high point for the year, but clearly in a higher range. 1.55 million for the sellers, almost 1.5 million for the buyers, which again to me is an indication that, where was it? Nope, recursive computing modules, that these buyers will go up to the 1-2 million pretty quickly on this move. So that was self-harmonizing power cores. Sterile conduits staying above 1 million. Again, there is enough demand for that, 1.1 million to 1 million. Yukomi superconductors, that's what I've kind of been hoping for. Look at that, specialized PI material. So clearly everything below that is starting to see more demand and some upwards pressure on the price, is also starting to move up close to a 1-year low point above 80k, 85,000 for the sellers and 79.5 for the buyers, almost 80,000 as well for those buyers. That should be enough demand, in my opinion, to keep us here and to perhaps go even higher if there's more upwards pressure across PI in general. But the advanced PI materials right here, you can see wetware mainframes basically flat for the week, still above 1.4 million though, 1.45 to almost 1.5 million for the sellers, and buyers above 1.4 as well. I do think shows there is more demand all of a sudden in PI. I do believe that there is expectation that CCP opening up the possibility for more industry will mean even more demand for PI, and that in general we're in a much better spot than a couple of years ago. So I'd say good news. Yeah, for me, I'm mostly building coolants and mechanical parts, so I can easily bring those, sell them at around 10k. I'm pretty damn happy with that. Next up, advanced moon materials, 29.45. Here, of course, we're expecting a different story. I don't see any reason why advanced moon materials would not be still be massively oversupplying the market. We were basically at 1-year low points across the board last week. So let's take a look here. Crystalline carbonite forming a bottom, but yeah, we're basically just above 100 disc. 106 for the sellers, 100 disc for the buyers, and that's like losing 50% over the course of the last year, and it's in fact losing almost 50% over the course of just the last 3 months. So clearly the mining changes are a big part of this, and well, perhaps players were focusing a little bit too much on the expensive battleships, the expensive Tech 1 stuff. That was basically the very first thing that happened after CCP changed the mining situation in December and basically said we're ending scarcity, right? Players said, where the hell is the end of scarcity? Well, this might just be it, right? These much lower prices for advanced moon materials do mean increased availability, but might not have been exactly where players expected it to be. Then we've got titanium carbide for Caldari, still below 100 disc, flattening out a little bit, obviously after losing that much in value. Here it's actually losing 200 disc on 300 over the course of the last year. That's definitely a big smackdown. It's 94 for the sellers and 89 for the buyers. For Minmatar stuff, Fernite carbide also doing a little bit of a 100 disc bounce here, but very far away from the 175, 150 plus that we had most of the year. 115 though for the sellers and 100 disc for the buyers. Perhaps a little bit more interest, or perhaps a little bit harder to get than some of the others. And then we get tungsten carbide for Amar, makes its way back to 125. All right, 118 for the first seller here, but it's tiny. 127 to 118 as well, and still start of the year 225. So this is another pretty much 50% loss. For Caldari it's 75% and more. Let's take a look at the metamaterials. I think they can't really withstand this pressure, and there we go. It's 1-year low point, which is, I mean, it's normal considering the most likely explanation for all of this is that moon materials have doubled in availability, and that's what's massively being done at the moment in the new meta for mining. And so you got an average price of 12,500 that was easily defended throughout almost all the trials and tribulations of the EVE economy in general, I would say. Even during the time of massive plentifulness, metamaterials held on quite well. The whole scarcity phase was weathered very impressively, super stable metamaterials, but now, you know, this just can't stay forever, and so it's on the downside. It's increased availability, and that is just causing too much supply. So we're talking 8.5 for the sellers, 5,000 disc for the buyers. No one is interested in metamaterials at this point anymore, it seems. But I think there's basically so much of it around that it's just so cheap. Everyone has plenty, and it's still coming. It just keeps keeps being massively supplied. Non-linear metamaterials, same story, although 15k is a completely different price range, of course. 15.3 for the sellers, 12.9 for the buyers. But again, from the start of the year, massive decline. Then we've got, let's see, plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar. Not as pronounced, but again, we are in a much lower range. 1 year low points are quite often being created, 14.2 to 13.5. And then finally for Amar terahertz metamaterials, that's also breaking down. Basically 12.5 was defended on several occasions, but we are at a 1 year low point here as well. 12,200 for the sellers and 10,400 for the buyers. So first signs here, a little bit of bottom forming in the carbides, but the pressure is clearly on across the board. I think we'll be able to just go over the rest of these advanced materials decently quickly. Here is fermionic condensate. After a spike in early February, we just went straight down to 1 year low point, and we're still seeing pressure despite the fact that we're well below 50,000 now for the prices. Ferrogel, bit of a bounce after a 1 year low point. Interesting, definitely you know, some buying. Here is the big volume that pushed us back to 30k. So someone said below 30k should be a buy opportunity. I personally think that's wrong, a little bit too aggressive, but we'll see in the upcoming weeks what happens here. Then we get fullerite, 1 year low point, and starting to move sideways a little bit, so trying to form a bottom below 500 ISK. Hypersynaptic fibers, also a little bit of a push up here after reaching 7,500 ISK. So this is just perhaps even a dead cat bounce. Then we got nano transistors starting to move sideways, again below 3,000 ISK. Phenolic composites moving sideways just above 1,000 ISK, which we had 1,800, 1,900 less than a year ago. Our new ones, here is pressurized oxidizers. Are we starting to see pressure here? They could become perhaps a little bit of a barometer, but for now volatility is not that great. We are touching 10k on a couple of occasions though, so if we could go below that, I would say then we get massive confirmation that pressure is here. And that's exactly what's happening for the reinforced carbon fiber. At least we're below 10,000 ISK in a more substantial way. Sellers coming in at 9.5, buyers at 9,150. If pressurized oxidizers can't hold on, then I think, yeah, we are across the board really moving to a lower range. Ceramic fibers finally below 200 ISK, 1 year low point, and that's yeah, more than 50% loss compared to a year ago as well. So advanced movements is where the action is, you could say, but I'd be very careful calling these buy opportunities. This might just be where the increased availability is really showing up at the moment. Let's take a look at the impact on Take-Two ships then, coming in at 3640. Like that. And yeah, for those that were thinking we'll be back in the volatility or anything like that, which I was kind of hoping for, of course, from a trader's perspective, I would say now it's still no. You're gonna get very cheap Take-Two ships in all likeliness from all of this, and we might actually have to look for new bottom ranges before volatility picks up, buy even lower to try and sell at a profit. It's really not easy in the current circumstances. Basilisk is at 164 to 155 million, and you can clearly see here that this might just be the new range, 150 to 180. Buy below 150, try to sell at 180 perhaps, but it's still, I think, a little bit early to tell. The Cerberus is just continuing the downward slide, going straight through the 150, no resistance, no hesitation whatsoever. We're just continuing to go down. So another 1 year low point, 145 for the sellers, 140 for the buyers. I think last week I said this looks like a really good time to buy a Cerberus. This now looks like an even better time to buy a Cerberus. Be very careful if you do decide to take those gambles. I would always do so in smaller volumes, smaller chunks, so that you can you know, perhaps take advantage of even lower prices later down the line. The Guardian has started to move sideways, but if you're looking for volatility, that's not exactly the name for this, right? Bottoms 160 might just be where some buying is finally starting to come in, but they're very shy, which I think is quite understandable. It is a new range. We'll have to have some new price discovery happening here. 167 to 147 million for the buyers. So you're again buying below 150. But it's very risky. That's basically the situation. The Hound did go below 20 million, moved back to 22.5 billion. Maybe there's like a tiny trade to be done here, but pressure is back on here already as well. 20.8 to less than 20 million for the buyers. So again, new range is probably here. Iquitursa, our Triglavian barometer, is doing something a little bit different, going back above 600 million, although yeah, we did just touch a 1-year low point, so maybe some buying and some interest managed to push us back. 634 to 571. Buyers really not willing to go all that higher at this point, so we'll again see how this evolves. Ishtar, 1-year low point 150, doing a bit of a bounce here. Obviously, yeah, 150 million for an Ishtar is not bad, even with I think it's the Proteus gaining the ability in some configurations for 5 heavy drones. Well, it's Tech 3, this is Tech 2, it's way cheaper, and I must also say, well, the Ishtar can run all the high-sec combat sites. If I'm not mistaken, a Proteus cannot run 3 out of 10s and 4 out of 10s. So from the PvE perspective, there's definitely the fact that the Ishtar can run more than the Proteus that has an advantage. I think for wormhole space, a Proteus is becoming a pretty damn interesting option. But yeah, the Ishtar, a bit of a bounce, but that's just from a 1-year low point, 163 to 153 at this point. Manticore, that's more interesting if you're looking to buy, going below 20 million finally. 20 million for the first seller, 21 for most, 14.5 million for the buyers of Manticore. Yeah, honestly, I'd put up a buy order for 1 or 2 Manticores here if you can buy them close to 15 million considering this 1-year charge. That's definitely not bad, but again, don't buy all of them. Don't put all your ISK on a trade like this, because this might still just be the start. Although yeah, a bit of bottom forming here. Yeah, definitely something to look into, I would say. Then we get the Munin below 150 on the average price, 153 to 138. So Munin might just become a less than 140 for your trigger. But where's the volatility? Where are the trades? They're clearly not happening. Nemesis continuing to break down, and that's the warning. Basically right below 20 million looked really good. You actually got a little bit of a bounce, but now we're going even lower. So another 1-year low point, 17.3 million for the sellers, 15.3 for the buyers. The Oneros continuing to go down, another 1-year low point, 123 to 86 million. Look at that margin opening up here. No one is really willing to say, I'm going to buy a lot of Tech 2 ships, because they're seeing what's happening in advanced movements. They're seeing the increased availability. This is really, though, pretty damn crazy cheap for anything that's basically below battleship. I think maybe below battlecruiser, maybe it can go up to cruiser. Maybe we should take a look at that at some point. So here is then the Panther. Whoa, really? 750 on today's average? That would be crazy as well. Well, sellers are below 1 billion and buyers are at below 900 million as well. So the pressure is starting to mount even on the Black Ops battleships. They're below 1 billion in a pretty substantial way. That's interesting. Purifier doing a bit of a bounce after breaking 20 million, but look at the continued pressure right back where we started, 22.5 to 19 million. Next here we get the Scimitar, so that's the new range, 135, 140, something like that I suspect. Yeah, 138 to 125 even for the buyers. And even the Widow has moved below 1 billion ISK, so that clearly shows, oh man, 980 million for the sellers, 915 million for the buyers. So we are in the cheaper Tech 2 ships range, which is quite interesting, I would say. So I'm quickly, just out of interest, right? We got Tech 2 battleships going below 1 billion ISK, and I'm kind of curious as for the Tech 2 battle cruisers. So we're actually gonna take a quick look at that, because the extra product for the week is actually gonna be the Gecko. So what I'm curious about, faction battleships, right? You get the Tech 2 one for less than 1 billion at this point. What's the Thunderchild going for? Same price, 900 million ISK for a Thunderchild. So why would you buy a Thunderchild when you could probably buy a Tech 2? That's starting to be interesting. Still 780 million here, 500 million Armageddon Navy issue is a little bit cheaper. So I think, yeah, although, you know, Megatron Navy issue 700 million, 750 for a Dominic's Navy issue, and then the pirate factions. Let's take a quick look at those. Look at that, a Bargis now costs more than a Tech 2 battleship as well. Macaria at 715 is still a little bit more doable. Nestor 1.4 billion, Nightmare 1.1 billion. So we do have potentially a reversal happening here with Tech 2 battleships, and then I do have to take a quick look at the Golem and things like that. At the Marauders, I believe they are. Here's the Paladin, 1.2 billion chart. Look at that. Even the Golem is now 1.27 billion. So a Golem, 1.27 billion. And then we've got our other PvE king, which is the Rattlesnake, is currently costing almost 1.2 billion ISK as well. So this is clearly something that perhaps will need to be looked at as well, is that faction battleships have basically become as expensive as Tech 2 battleships. I'm not sure if that's what CCP had in mind when they thought about more availability. And then battle cruisers, command ships, or the advanced ones. Just want to take a quick look at the charts here as well. Yeah, 1 year low point for the Absolution, for the Damnation, Nighthawk as well, quite pronounced. Vulture going for around 300 at this point. Astarte 1 year low point, starting to see a little bit of buying action on going below 300 million as well. EOS definitely down. Claymore gonna be interesting, yep, down below 300 million as well. And then the Sleipnir, I think a PvP god did see a little bit more interest, but the pressure is already mounting as well. So for Tech 2 ships, we're in the cheap stuff, relatively speaking, and this to me does start to put faction stuff in a very strange perspective, but we will of course see what CCP actually has planned. Let's move on to Tech 3 ships at this point at 45.35. Like that, and we'll start with the destroyers, of course. Here's the Confessor slowly making its way back above 50 million, which to me is a bit of a surprise, because if I'm not mistaken, the Confessor still had some supplies last week. Half a page, but nothing too crazy. So yeah, 52.5 million for the sellers, 47.2 million, 3 million for the buyers. And basically here I think enough supplies to stabilize, but we're above 50. Then we get the Hecate that was already substantially above 50 million, is also finally stabilizing a little bit. 53 million for the sellers, 49 for the buyers, and supply almost half a page as well. Definitely nothing crazy in the volume. In fact, I would call them a slightly low. And then finally we get the Jackdaw. That's going crazy again. 1 year high point, 64 million for the sellers, 52 million for the buyers. Finally, we're seeing a little bit more supply, but it's still only 118 and 8 years. It's not that much. So very, very high prices for these three tactical destroyers. You can see that there is some supply starting to come in, taking advantage of these prices. Will we finally see an impact on this Vapor, which I think was under pressure last week? Let's see. Finally, at least it formed the bottom, and it's trying to crawl its way back to 45 million. It's so much below everything else, and the main reason is there's just none of them here. Which is really showing that complete decoupling between this Vapor and the three other tactical destroyers. Still 40 million for the buyers, 10 million below anything else. The Jackdaw is doing another spike. So there is something happening here, I really do think, where Jackdaw, Hecate, Confessor are their own little market that does basically communicate with one another. I do think that basically what's happening here with the Jackdaw, what happened here with the 55 million, is what helped the Confessor make its way back above 50. and then the Hecate is basically stabilizing at what's probably going to be a new range, which is going to be close to 55 million. Because this will require more ships, so that should give this more breeding room and this more breeding room, and then you would expect on all of this to see a Zwepel serious jump up, at least also close to 1 year high points, but it's in fact still trading just around average for the whole year, and it's just basically stopping a bottom that happened last week. So last week was definitely your buy opportunity for the Zwepel. Quick look at the cruisers next. Here is the Legion, stable on the 180 on the chart, so definitely under pressure. I would say 182 to 169. You're buying a Legion hull for less than 170. If you're feeling risky, maybe you could try that as a bit of an investment. A jump up to 190 is not completely out of the question if maybe a Proteus wave could do something. Here's the Loki, for instance, yeah, back above 200 million. So here last week you probably could have bought below 180 and you're already selling at 200 plus 190 million for the buyers as well. So that's kind of interesting. Then we get the Proteus, yeah, shooting up, of course, on the massive buff. I think 5 heavy drones is something that'll work really well for a lot of players. It is one of those metrics where you're basically getting the most out of the drone potential of a ship. So that's pretty huge. 240 million for the sellers, 220 for the buyers. Has the Proteus become the king of the tactical strategic cruisers, excuse me? Well, price-wise, I think it is this week, but maybe in performance, who knows? Let me know in the comments actually what you think of the Proteus at this point, or maybe even your order. What's the best strategic cruiser, or what's the lineup for you from best to worst, or vice versa? And then we get the Tengu, which is of course like the stable shield missiles. I think it can do drones as well in some configuration. 190 to 176. So for this week though, Proteus, highest, most expensive strategic cruiser, that has been a very long time as well. And so here is again the opportunity for a CCP intervention. The one thing that I have to be honest with is I didn't think they would just touch the Proteus, and so I definitely never jumped in, and I don't actually think I ever mentioned that, yeah, maybe you can buy Proteus at this point. I always said if you want to gamble on a CCP intervention, you know, look for those low points. So I would have said, yep, here Legion, Legion, Legion. Why the hell not? I think even the Tengu showed like a low point, but the Proteus was a completely different gamble on something that's been basically way more stable, as well as being the worst of the bunch, but that would have been the right one to buy, which is of course also something completely different that we might have to keep in mind in the development process. Before this, right, CCP would have basically come out with, we're gonna rebalance tick 3 and then we're gonna change everything to, you know, try and follow a new vision. And here they're really willing to go. Proteus is lagging behind. It's a Galente ship, let's give it 5 heavy drones, and there we go. So that does show something completely different, which potentially means looking at the market in a different way if you want to invest for the CCP spike like here. Finally, we got the extra product for the week, 5120. And we're gonna quickly take a look at the Gecko. It's been a while, so let's take a look at this one. Interesting, surprisingly stable. Also, although the very long trend is obviously up for the year from around 100 million, low point at probably a 95-ish. It's currently selling for 110. Buyers coming in at 100 million. And so the reason I do cover the Gecko from time to time is because there are items like this in EVE Online that cannot just be farmed, cannot be produced endlessly, and those tend to be inflation hedges, which a lot of people would instinctively say, well, if you want to hedge against inflation in EVE Online, buy plex, buy stuff from that category, but there are other options out there like the Gecko. The one difference is that from time to time CCP will make the Gecko a reward for from a certain activity. Maybe it can be like a daily login reward for the anniversary that might be coming early May. It might also be for like a reward for some activity in game, but it's always limited in time, and so then you get some serious pullbacks. I'm not sure, I think these are more speculation because I haven't really seen a lot of Gecko action over the last year. But so then after that happens, you get a general uptrend that follows inflation, and then you get another, you gotta sell on time, of course. You gotta keep an eye on everything and sell at the right time for the Gecko. But it is an option for you if you're looking for something to basically dump some iskin that is likely to have those high points where you can sell and basically take advantage of inflation as well. That is the Gecko. I myself am holding at least a couple of them. I can't really remember what I bought them at, but basically I'm looking at those as potentially some small gold bars. If inflation were to ever really get out of control, you should see some really nice returns on geckos that you're holding. So there we go. That's going to be it for this ETH Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.